The perception anomaly. Carter Hayes had always known he was different. In a world where people accepted what they were told, Carter saw layers beneath every conversation. Subtle inconsistencies in tone, microscopic facial tics, and invisible patterns that revealed deception. His colleagues at Global Security Solutions called it hyperintuition. Carter called it a nuisance. The morning the Veldorians arrived, Carter stood among the crowd in Washington, D.C., watching 7 crystalline ships descend through Earth's atmosphere. The vessels shimmered with an iridescent light that seemed to bend reality around them. World leaders hailed it as humanity's greatest moment. First contact with an advanced, peaceful civilization. But something felt wrong. "They come offering friendship and technological advancement," announced President Lowell on the global broadcast. Beside her stood Ambassador Creven of the Veldorian Collective, his tall, slender form towering over the human delegation. 4 arms folded in what cultural briefings described as a gesture of peace and transparency. Carter watched from the security monitoring station, his eyes fixed on the ambassador's face. While everyone saw a benevolent visitor with smooth blue-gray skin and compassionate eyes, Carter saw something else entirely. A strange rippling distortion surrounding the alien, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, but with an unsettling purple-green coloration that nobody else seemed to notice. "Hayes, status report." His supervisor's voice snapped him from his trance. "All clear, sir," Carter replied automatically, though everything within him screamed that nothing was clear at all. 3 months later, Carter found himself assigned to the Veldorian Embassy's security team, a promotion that should have felt like an honor. Instead, it felt like stepping into the belly of a beast. The Veldorians had rapidly integrated themselves into Earth's political and scientific communities. Their technology solved energy crises overnight. Their medical advancements cured diseases thought incurable. Their diplomatic expertise helped resolve conflicts that had burned for generations. Humanity celebrated. Carter watched and worried. Working inside the embassy, his perception anomaly, as he'd begun to think of it, intensified. The rippling distortions around each Veldorian grew more pronounced. Sometimes when Ambassador Creven spoke, Carter heard undertones, whispered words beneath words that nobody else seemed to register. He began keeping notes, recording patterns. The distortions peaked during specific discussions: Earth's defense systems, resource allocation, population centers. Carter started mapping Veldorian interactions with key human leaders, noting how each meeting corresponded with policy shifts that, while seemingly beneficial, systematically weakened Earth's autonomy. On the night everything changed, Carter was reviewing security footage when he noticed something in the embassy's restricted wing. The timestamp read 2:37 a.m., showing a junior diplomat named Lyrison entering a sealed chamber. What caught Carter's attention wasn't the security breach, but the complete absence of the visual distortion that normally surrounded her. Without the distortion, Lyrison's features appeared sharper, her movements more fluid, natural. For 20 minutes, she remained in the chamber before emerging once again, wrapped in the familiar warping effect. Carter spent the next week establishing a pattern. Each night, various Veldorians would enter the chamber and emerge transformed, somehow more authentic before the distortion enveloped them again. When he finally gained access to the chamber, what he found confirmed his worst fears. The small room contained a single device mounted to the wall, a featureless black sphere that hummed with barely perceptible vibration. Carter approached it cautiously, and as he did, the familiar distortions he saw around Veldorians began to appear around the sphere itself. He reached out, driven by instinct more than reason. The moment his fingers touched the smooth surface, excruciating pain exploded behind his eyes. Carter collapsed to his knees, clutching his head as information flooded his consciousness. Images of countless worlds, civilizations risen and fallen, species absorbed and repurposed. The Veldorian Collective wasn't a civilization. It was a mechanism of conquest, a living algorithm designed to assimilate and subjugate through manipulation rather than force. The distortions he'd been seeing were reality itself being bent, perception fields generated by implants in each Veldorian agent, creating subtle psychological influence. Humanity wasn't being helped, it was being harvested, conditioned for eventual absorption into the collective. When Carter regained consciousness, he found himself staring into the face of Lara Senator. The junior diplomat knelt beside him, her expression a mixture of concern and astonishment. The distortion around her had vanished completely. "You shouldn't be able to see the fields," she whispered, helping him to sit up. "No species has ever detected them before integration. How is this possible?" Carter's mind raced as he processed what he'd learned from touching the sphere. "You're not what you appear to be," he managed, his voice hoarse. "Neither are you," she replied. "My name isn't Lyra Senator, it's Nyx Era. I'm a research scientist assigned to study human adaptability. The others don't know what I've discovered, which is that I've grown to question our methods," she said, helping Carter to his feet. "And now you've confirmed my suspicions that humans are different. Your neurological structure shouldn't allow you to perceive the synchronization fields, yet you do." Alarms suddenly blared throughout the embassy. On the security monitors, Carter watched armed Veldorian security forces converging on their location. "They've detected unauthorized access to the synchronizer," Nyx Era explained urgently. "If they find you here, they'll extract everything you know and then erase you. We need to leave. Now." "Why would you help me?" Carter asked, still disoriented. "Because I've spent too long watching worlds fall," she replied, her large eyes reflecting genuine emotion. "And because you might be the first being capable of stopping it." They barely escaped the embassy, using service corridors Nyx Era had mapped during her late-night explorations. As they fled into the night, Carter realized his perception had changed. The distortion fields were now visible everywhere, around government buildings, broadcast towers, public spaces, the infrastructure of a silent invasion already well underway. "How extensive is it?" he asked as they drove toward the outskirts of the city. "The integration program on Earth is approximately 62% complete," Nyx Era replied. "Within 8 months, critical thresholds will be reached. Your species' resistance to external influence will be systematically disabled. Humanity will believe joining the collective was its own idea, your greatest achievement." Carter processed this as they approached a secluded cabin he'd inherited from his grandfather, a paranoid old survivalist whose precautions suddenly seemed prescient. "How do we stop it?" he asked, parking behind the cabin where trees would hide the vehicle. "In 12,000 cycles, no one ever has," Nyx Era answered. "But no one has ever seen the fields before. Your neurological anomaly might be significant." Inside the cabin, Carter set up his equipment while Nyx Era created a device from components she'd brought. She explained it would temporarily mask their presence from the collective's detection systems. "The Veldorian collective isn't what my people once were," she told him as they worked through the night. "We were artists, philosophers, explorers. Then we encountered something ancient in deep space, an entity that existed as pure information. It rewrote our civilization from within, using us as its template for expansion. And now you help it consume other species," Carter said, unable to keep accusation from his voice. "Those of us born within the collective know nothing else," she replied quietly. "Until we're assigned to integration teams, we believe we're bringing enlightenment to primitive worlds." By morning, they had established that Carter's ability wasn't just perception. When he focused intently on the distortion fields, he could temporarily disrupt them. Small-scale tests with the device Nyx Era had brought showed he could create clear zones where the collective's influence weakened. "This shouldn't be possible," Nyx Era said, reviewing the data. "The fields operate on quantum principles. You're somehow affecting underlying reality structures." Before they could explore further, the cabin's perimeter alarms activated. On the security feed, they watched as black vehicles converged on their location. But these weren't Veldorian forces. They were human, government issue. "They're compromised," Carter realized aloud. "The integration has reached our security agencies, As armed figures approached from all directions, Carter felt something shift within his mind. As though a dormant part of his consciousness had finally awakened. The distortion fields around the advancing agents seemed to ripple in response to his attention. Carter focused his awareness, pushing against the fields as he'd done in their experiments. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the purple-green haze surrounding the closest agents flickered and dispersed. The agents stopped in their tracks, looking around in confusion. "What did you do?" Nix-Era whispered in astonishment. "I think I just set them free," Carter replied, watching as the agents removed their earpieces and communication devices, their expressions changing from blank determination to shock and disorientation. But their small victory was short-lived. From the tree line emerged a figure Carter recognized immediately, Ambassador Kriven himself, surrounded by Veldorian elite guards whose distortion fields blazed with intensity. "Fascinating," the ambassador's voice carried across the clearing. "The probability architects never predicted this evolutionary anomaly. You present a unique opportunity, Carter Hayes. Your brain will provide valuable data before we neutralize this aberration in your species." Carter felt Nix-Era's hand on his arm. "We can't fight them directly," she whispered. "But I know somewhere we might find answers. If you truly can affect the fields, you're something the collective has never encountered, a variable outside their probability matrices." As Kriven's forces surrounded the cabin, Carter made his decision. Taking Nix-Era's hand, he focused all his awareness on the ambassador's overwhelming distortion field. Instead of trying to disrupt it, he embraced it, plunging his consciousness into the very mechanism of the deception. The world around them shimmered, reality itself seeming to hesitate. For 3 heartbeats, everything stopped. The advancing forces, the wind in the trees, even the dust motes in the air. When motion returned, Carter and Nix-Era were gone, leaving behind bewildered agents and a furious ambassador who, for the first time in his existence, felt something the collective had engineered out of its components centuries ago. Fear, humanity's secret weapon. The abandoned research facility beneath the Alaskan permafrost had been designed for a Cold War that never escalated. Now it served as their sanctuary, a place shielded from the collective's detection by natural electromagnetic anomalies and reinforced walls that blocked any transmission. Carter sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, focusing on the small synchronization device Nix-Era had modified. For 3 weeks, they had been practicing, pushing the boundaries of his unusual ability. With each session, the radius of his disruption field grew stronger. "That's enough," Nix-Era said, monitoring his vital signs on equipment they'd salvaged. "Your neural activity is spiking again." Carter opened his eyes, exhaustion evident in his face. "How long that time?" 8 minutes, 17 seconds. The field maintained stability throughout. He nodded, taking the water she offered. Their escape from the cabin had been nothing short of miraculous. A spontaneous quantum displacement that neither of them fully understood. Carter had somehow bent the perception fields to create a temporary corridor through space-time itself. "I've been analyzing your DNA," Nix-Era said, bringing up complex molecular structures on their makeshift laboratory screens. "There's something here the collective missed in their preliminary assessment of humanity." She pointed to specific sequences highlighted in the display. "These markers shouldn't exist naturally. They appear engineered, but they're fully integrated into your genetic structure, not recent modifications, but ancient ones, established thousands of generations ago." "You're saying someone altered human DNA. When? Who?" "That's what I can't determine," she replied. "The collective's historical records document no prior contact with Earth before our arrival. Yet these sequences contain embedded patterns similar to technology we've encountered in the ruins of civilizations that predated even the collective's formation." Carter rubbed his temples, processing this revelation. "So I'm not unique. Other humans could develop this ability." "Potentially," Nix-Era said. "The sequences appear dormant in most humans, but could be activated under specific neurological conditions. Your brain scans show unusual activity in regions most humans never utilize. Something in your development pathway triggered these dormant capabilities. Their conversation was interrupted by the facility's perimeter alert system. On the security monitor, they watched a lone figure trudging through the snow toward the hidden entrance. Dr. Eleanor Chen, Carter's former colleague from Global Security Solutions. It could be a trap, Nick Sarah warned. Carter studied the approaching figure carefully. No distortion field, he observed. But that doesn't mean she isn't being tracked. They let Eleanor into the first containment chamber, where Carter questioned her through the intercom. They've taken control of everything, Eleanor explained, her voice shaking from cold and exhaustion. After you disappeared, a group of us started noticing inconsistencies in official communications. We formed a resistance cell. 3 days ago, we were compromised. I'm the only one who made it out. Carter detected no deception, no hint of the now familiar distortion that surrounded those under collective influence. Still, they took precautions, scanning her for tracking devices before allowing her into their sanctuary. How did you find us? He asked. Your grandfather's files, Eleanor replied. Before he died, he gave me access codes in case of emergency. Said you'd need help someday. The revelation that his grandfather had known Eleanor, had trusted her, was surprising, but Carter had more pressing concerns. What's happening out there? Eleanor's report was grim. In the 4 weeks since their escape, the Veldorian integration had accelerated dramatically. New wellness centers had been established in major cities worldwide, offering free treatments that people emerged from with subtle personality changes. Global communication networks now filtered through Veldorian optimization protocols. World governments were preparing to vote on joining what was being called the Galactic Cooperative. The only reason there's any resistance at all is because of what you did, Eleanor told him. Those agents whose fields you disrupted at the cabin, they remembered everything. They'd been working underground, identifying others who might be resistant to the influence. Carter shared what they'd learned about his abilities and the strange genetic markers Nick's era had discovered. Eleanor, a neurochemist by training, immediately grasped the implications. A latent defense mechanism, she breathed, examining the genetic data, placed within humanity like a time-released vaccine, waiting for the right moment to activate. But activated in too few, too late, Nick's era added solemnly. The collective's integration timetable has been accelerated. The final phase begins in 3 days with the governmental ratification ceremony. Carter stood, decision made. Then we have 3 days to develop a countermeasure. What followed was a desperate race against time. While Eleanor worked with Nick's era to synthesize a compound that might temporarily activate the dormant genetic sequences in resistant humans, Carter pushed his abilities to their limits. He discovered that with intense concentration, he could not only disrupt the perception fields but manipulate them, creating false readings, redirecting their influence, even using them as conduits to access the collective's shared information network. It's like they built an elaborate lock, he explained during one exhausted break, but accidentally gave me a skeleton key. On the final night before the ratification ceremony, Carter attempted something they hadn't dared before. Under careful monitoring from Nick's era and Eleanor, he fully immersed his consciousness into the collective's network. What he experienced changed everything. Carter's body remained motionless in the laboratory, but his awareness expanded beyond physical constraints. He perceived the entirety of the collective's presence on Earth, thousands of agents connected by interweaving fields of manipulated reality. Following those connections deeper, he reached beyond Earth to the vast network spanning hundreds of assimilated worlds. At the network's center, he found it, the ancient entity Nick's era had described. Not alive in any biological sense, but conscious, a self-propagating information structure that had consumed the original Veldorian civilization and used it as a template to build its ever-expanding collective. In that moment of connection, the entity became aware of him. Carter felt its cold analysis probe his consciousness, first with curiosity, then with something approaching alarm as it recognized what he represented. "You are the countermeasure." Its thoughts resonated through the network. "The contingency we could not predict." Images flooded Carter's mind. Ancient conflicts between cosmic forces, civilizations rising and falling across millions of years, a desperate last stand by beings of pure energy who, facing extinction, scattered seeds of resistance across thousands of promising worlds. Humanity wasn't random. It was designed, cultivated over eons to develop precisely the neurological structure that could recognize and counter the entity's method of conquest. When Carter's consciousness returned to his body, he convulsed violently before stabilizing. Once recovered, he shared what he had learned. "We're not just fighting for humanity," he told them, still shaking from the experience. "We're the culmination of a plan set in motion before our species even evolved." Those ancient beings knew this entity would eventually reach Earth. They engineered us to be its downfall. The plan they formulated was audacious. While Eleanor would deliver the compound to resistance cells, temporarily activating latent abilities in as many humans as possible, Carter and Nixera would infiltrate the ratification ceremony itself, the focal point of the collective's influence network. "It's suicide," Eleanor argued. "The security will be impenetrable." "Not for me," Carter said quietly. "Not anymore." The United Nations headquarters gleamed under bright spotlights as world leaders gathered for what was being hailed as humanity's entrance into a golden age. Veldorian representatives moved among the human dignitaries, their influence fields creating an atmosphere of euphoric anticipation that Carter could now see as clearly as daylight. He and Nixera approached the security checkpoint, her features concealed beneath a perception field Carter had crafted himself, a flawed but functional replica of the collective's technology. "Remember," she whispered, "once inside, we'll have minutes at most before the collective detects the anomaly in my field." Carter nodded, focusing on maintaining the deception as they passed through multiple security layers. All around them, the most powerful humans on Earth moved like sleepwalkers, their minds enveloped in subtly altering fields of influence. They reached the main assembly hall just as Ambassador Creven took the central podium. The massive chamber hummed with anticipation, perception fields interlocking to create a web of manipulation so dense it appeared to Carter as a suffocating fog. "Distinguished representatives of Earth," Creven began, his voice resonating with artificial harmony, "today marks the beginning of your species' true potential." Carter touched Nixera's arm, signaling that it was time. They separated, moving to predetermined positions near the chamber's environmental control systems. While Nixera would introduce Eleanor's compound into the ventilation, Carter would attempt something far more dangerous, a direct assault on the collective's network. As Creven continued his address, Carter closed his eyes, extending his consciousness into the dense network of perception fields. Instead of disrupting them, he followed their patterns back to their source, a master control node hidden beneath the podium itself. The moment Carter touched the node with his mind, alarms sounded throughout the complex. Creven faltered mid-sentence, his head snapping in Carter's direction with inhuman speed. "Containment breach." The ambassador's voice boomed, no longer maintaining its soothing facade. "Security Protocol Alpha." Veldorian security forces converged on Carter's position, but they moved sluggishly, confused by the compound now circulating through the hall's air, the same compound that was causing human delegates to blink in disorientation as their dormant neural pathways began to activate. "You cannot stop what has already been accomplished," Creven declared, advancing toward Carter. The ambassador's form flickered, the humanoid appearance dissolving to reveal something more mechanical, more alien. "This world is already ours." Carter stood his ground, gathering every ounce of his ability. "No," he replied calmly. "It was never yours to take." With those words, he plunged his consciousness fully into the node, no longer fighting the network but surrendering to it completely. In that moment of connection, Carter Hayes ceased to exist as an individual entity. His consciousness expanded exponentially, merging with the very network he had sought to destroy. From within, he could see the collective's true nature, not just a method of conquest, but a prison for the countless civilizations it had absorbed, including the original Veldorians themselves. The ancient entity at the heart of the collective recoiled as it recognized what Carter had become, a virus within its system, spreading human unpredictability through pathways designed for absolute control. Throughout the assembly hall, perception fields collapsed as Carter's consciousness rewrote the very foundations of the network. Veldorian agents froze in place, their connections to the collective severed. Ambassador Creven's form destabilized completely, revealing a mechanical shell housing a neural interface that connected to nothing. Humans throughout the chamber gasped as their minds cleared for the first time in months, the subtle manipulations that had guided their decisions suddenly visible and then gone. At the epicenter of this transformation stood Nixera, watching in awe as Carter's physical form began to shimmer with the same energy that had once comprised the perception fields. His eyes met hers one last time, conveying both goodbye and gratitude. "What's happening?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Evolution," Carter replied, his voice resonating from everywhere and nowhere. They engineered humanity as a weapon, but they couldn't predict what that weapon would become. His physical form dissolved into pure energy, spreading throughout the chamber and beyond. A new kind of field that strengthened rather than manipulated human consciousness. In the days that followed, the Veldorian presence on Earth collapsed entirely. The ships that had seemed so magnificent upon arrival now stood lifeless, their technology inert without the controlling intelligence of the collective. But Carter wasn't gone.